Book of Ruth, chapter 4, and I did one of those silly things that isn't always easy, but I have a study Bible at home that I use to mark up and doodle in, and if my pages in Ruth are clean, so I'm like you guys probably. I don't have all the markings I needed, but in the book of Ruth, the word redeem appears like 20 times in different forms. Just for instance, its first appearance I think is in 2:20. Yes, look with me at 2:20. Well, actually, it's a form of it. I don't know what the NIV says. It says, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead." Again, then we said to her, the man is our relative. He is our closest relative. And the second word there, it should be closest redeemer. Yours says what? Guardian. That's the word we talked about last week. I believe I told you it was Goel. Or the word. Now, most Hebrew texts will say this, and I'm going with this more, even though when you see papers or anything written in it, it's Goel. I believe what they're looking at is this is the verb form, so this is the root form you'll always find. This is the noun form, and since it's a Hebrews are very... I'm going to tell you something. I don't know who's right and who's wrong when it comes to how you spell things in Hebrew, but I'm going to give you just 2 Hebrew words tonight, and I've seen them spelled, each one of them, 4 different ways. So, it's very... what was the one thing I told you? When you see a verb, this is how this word is really spelled. All verbs in the Hebrew are 3 letters. And since this letter is really not translatable all the time, it's like a breath mark. So you got to put vowels in. That's why they put those vowels in. So it's Gael. No, that's that's the different sound. This word basically, what I'm going to do is give you, first of all, let's do this. I'm going to give you terms. I'm going to give you my outline for where we're going with. We're going to study the doctrine of redemption tonight. I want you to understand, since at some point Boaz is going to play the part of the Redeemer, what does that mean? So let's go. What we're going to do is understand all the terms for redemption. We're going to look at the provisions for redemption. We're going to look at the fulfillment of this Old Testament picture of redemption and the results of redemption. There are certain key doctrines to salvation, and this is one of them. If you fully understand redemption, you will never think you could lose your salvation. I really feel the different denominations I've talked to and different people, groups within Christianity over my lifetime, I can't begin to tell you how many people feel you could lose your salvation, and it's because they do not understand redemption. And one picture we're going to draw out of that is basically you were bought with a price you couldn't have paid. How can you unpay that price and go back into the slave market? You can't do that. So we'll look at that, and I'll explain to you why there's certain words that it's impossible to do that. You cannot do that. Once you're saved, always saved. Now the problem is, once people are saved, they don't usually grow. So they act worse than the world. So, therefore people say, see, you're not saved. And we're not going to get into that tonight. So the first word we're going to look at, and this is the word, this is a key word to the book of Ruth. This appears, let me count them real quick, 1, 2, 4, 8, 13, 17, 18, 19, about 22 times in the book of Ruth alone. A form of this word. In other words, if you go to a lexicon of the Hebrew language, you may see prepositions slammed on the front of this. You may see it spelled a little different, but it still is the root word, Gael. It means to remove, it means to redeem, to ransom, to deliver. I want to give you all the definitions to this so you can, like, when you see how this all plugs in, you can say, this is so neat. So you got to get every word, every definition, and you'll see why it all plugs in. It means to remove from a dangerous situation, to purchase back, to protect. To remove from a dangerous situation, to purchase back, to protect. Also means to redeem, to ransom, to deliver. And when we get through all these words, we'll see how this will definitely give you a really good understanding. It's kind of interesting, because if you go in the Hebrew, there's a couple of words that are cognitives or synonyms to this word. They're closely related, but there's only two basic words for redemption. In the Greek, there's about 8. See the difference? And that's because as redemption, there was different applications to the redemption that Jesus fulfilled in the New Testament. So you can see that it needs more words to explain it all the time. The next word, and here's another, I'm going to give you both spellings that are basically there. Para. Para. And this is basically found, again, Job 33:24 is a key verse. I'm not going to turn to these. I want to turn to some of the ones in the New Testament. You'll see why. Because as we finish Ruth and finish this doctrine, you'll see how it all plugs in. But this word means to ransom, to deliver, to pay a price. So they're similar words, see? Now, here's where the rubber really hits the road. This was Greek New Testament. Hebrew Old Testament. Hot. This is Greek New Testament. Word number 1. This is a root word. The reason I say that is because if you go to look up lutro in a Greek lexicon, which is dictionary, you'll find it only once. But the root's used about 100 times. But the reason I gave you this as a key is because most of the times in the Old Testament, that's what this is translated as. Gael is lutro. So, lutro means to release from slavery, because of payment. To release from slavery because of payment. Or to loose or set free. It means to release from slavery because of a payment, or to loose or to set free. Turn to 1 Peter. We're going to go to a bunch of places now, so stay up with me. 1 Peter 1:18. We'll write them down and I'll read them, one or the other. And you'll see the significance as we go through these verses of how important redemption is. 1 Peter 1:18 says, knowing that you were not redeemed, lutro, with perishable things, like silver or gold, from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers. So when you were released from slavery because of a payment, what would the payment be? Well, it wasn't gold or silver, because in 1 Peter said for gold and silver are what? Perishable. Why would you be purchased out? In other words, if you had a purchase price from slavery and you were purchased out with $50, what good is that? It's perishable. So the idea of redemption, we were redeemed by a price we couldn't pay. Another verse is Luke 24:21. That's that word. Second word, closely related, is lutros. Lutrosis. It's deliverance from sin, much better. Well, these are much better. Deliverance from sin as a result of the work of Christ. Hebrews 9:12. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12. Hebrews 9:12 says, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood, He entered the holy place once and for all, having attained eternal redemption. Hebrews 9:12. Also, if you just want a couple of verses, Luke 1:68 and 2:38. Actually, look with me at Luke 2:38. Go to Luke chapter 2, verse 38. It's kind of interesting because Sunday morning, Will showed you how to get a definition of a word doing a word study from one word out. Saying, here's a Greek word, what does it mean? What I'm doing is just giving you the English word, here's redemption. Here's all the words used in the Bible for it. Now go back into it and say you can't look at it anymore as one word as redemption. So it's kind of a just a little twist on how you do these things. But Luke 2:38, it says, and at the very moment she came up and began giving thanks to God and continued to speak of Him to all those who were looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. Now, as we look at this whole idea of redemption, you'll see that in Isaiah, the Jewish people always looked at God being able to redeem them as a people and buy the land back. So if you think about that idea today, where's Israel at today? Aren't they looking for the same thing? Aren't they looking for God, their Goel, to redeem them, buy out their land, get rid of the people in the land? So that when Jesus was brought up in his testimony of Christ, right here in Luke 2:38, she said, He's the redemption of Jerusalem. He's the one that's going to redeem our land. So He was going to pay the price. She looked at Him and said, He's going to pay the price. Okay, let's get another word that's similar. Third word is lutron. And this is a really, turn with me to Mark 10:45. Everybody should be familiar with this verse at some point. Mark 10:45. It's kind of interesting because this whole idea in this section is they're looking at Jesus to rule and reign as king. And he gets to Mark 10:45, he says, For even the Son of Man did not come to be served as a king, but to serve and to give His life a ransom for many. So the idea behind lutron is a payment of a ransom and a price paid for one's freedom, or to redeem. And we got that as Mark 10:45, the same verse as in Matthew 20, I think it's 20:28. Huh? Yeah, Matthew 20:28. Fourth word. So get these down because sooner or later I'm going to have to change the page because I'm running out of room. Yes. Verb, root, noun. Noun. Sorry. Should have done that. Next word. I'm trying to go in alphabetical order because I didn't write them in alphabetical order. This is not. These are, the reason I started with lutro, that is your main emphasis of redemption. These next words are sort of like cognitives, but it's kind of interesting, the idea that the picture they draw with it. Because what happens is, here's your root. Lutron. Next, let's just do this. Anti-lutron. Okay? Anti-lutron. And first, this is a payment as a substitute. Substitute. That's an S in there. Look at 1 Timothy 1:26. 1 Timothy 2:6. I'm sorry. 1 Timothy 2:6. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 6. And again, while we're in the New Testament, you can see most of these that we're looking at, how about all of them, have to do with Christ's idea of redemption. The Old Testament just talks about redemption. They give you, and it's what we're basically going to look at is the greatest picture of redemption as far as the Old Testament is concerned, because we're looking at the Goel, and that's what Ruth's base picture was, that it was a great picture of redemption, but it gave you an illustration, a type. Christ fulfills it. 1 Timothy 2:6 says, who gave himself, this is Christ, who gave himself as a ransom for all. And that's this word anti-lutron. He's a payment as a substitute for all. That means when he gave himself, he made the payment as whose substitute? Which really easy. It says in the context, for all. Who did he substitute for? Everyone. So that helps to look at it that way. Anti-lutron. Next word. Let's go with this one. Apolutrosis. Now this is the same as this word with apo in the front. Apo means from. So this is an act, the act of release or state of being, resulting in redemption. So this is an act of release or state of being resulting in redemption. Let's look at Romans 3:24. Romans 3:24. Romans 3, let's put that up here, and I'll turn the page. Romans 3:24, and we'll go to 8:23 next. Being justified as a gift by His grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus. So again, this is the redemption that's in Christ Jesus, and it's the act of release or state of being resulting in redemption. 8:24. 8:24. I'm sorry, 8:23. Not only this, but we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves grown within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. So there's a point that our bodies are going to have a release. Number 6. Agorazo. Now this is kind of a colorful word. Now I'm going to put this letter in here. The D is put in there so you can pronounce it. It's not spelled with a D. It's agorazo. It's not zo, dizzo. Just telling you, it's not pronounced like a Z. It's pronounced like a disease. Now it's kind of interesting because this agar is what we call the market. So the root word is there is market. This means to buy. You've got to listen how I'm going to do this. Buy in the market. Because I'm going to give you a similar word in a minute. That's sort of a play on. Man is a slave sold to sin. And we find that in Romans 7:14. So since we're in Romans, turn to 7:14 and you'll see how this word plays out. Romans 7:14. Romans 7:14 says, "For we know the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold into the bondage of sin." So Paul realizes that he's been in the market because he's a sinner. He's sold into sin. Look at 1 Corinthians 6:20. 1 Corinthians 6:20. And this is where the word is used. 1 Corinthians 6:20 is where agorazo is. No, what I'm doing is giving you a picture in Romans 7:14. It's showing you that man is a slave. To actually be redeemed from a marketplace, you have to be sold into something. So it's showing you right now that as a sinner, you're sold into sin. You're in that market of sin. So we can call this marketplace sin. And it says in 1 Corinthians 6:20, "For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." The word bought there is agorazo. So you were in the market, you were purchased out of the market. And again, that's not the word redeemed as we're looking at it. That's why I'm saying I'm kind of using cognitives, words that are closely associated. Okay? 1 Corinthians 7:23. 1 Corinthians 7:23. Says you were bought with a price, do not become slaves of men. In other words, you've been, and what Paul is trying to get them to understand is they were a slave to sin. They had to do it. They were in that market. Christ made the price, paid for it, bought them out of the marketplace, and if they're willfully still there, it's because they just want to be there. They don't have to be in that marketplace because they've been bought out. Now, if you think about this, who paid the price? Did he pay full price? Christ paid the full price. You can't ever go around saying, well, I don't know if I'm saved. I don't know if it's been saved enough. I have to rededicate. Think of all the things that you've been thrown at for years. Once you're saved, you're saved. How can you reverse this idea of redemption? Think about that. And somebody said, well, I have to rededicate. I got to walk the aisle. I got to trust Christ as Lord so my life. No, what you have to do is grow. You have been bought out. The price has been paid. The next word will really smack you even harder, because this is ex-agorazo. And I'm putting the D in there again. And this is a verb. This is a verb too. This is to deliver, to buy back, to rescue. But this is the key. What I say, this word is what? Agora is market. Okay, all those Greek scholars, what's that word? Same as this word? So this is to buy out of the market. So when Christ did His work, He was in the market, saw that you were a sinner, paid that full price for your sin, and then when you were saved, you were bought out of it. See the difference? Let's see how it plays. Galatians 3:13. Galatians 3:13. Got to wear shades when I'm up here. We're going to go to a few verses here because I want you to get the full flavor of this word. Galatians 3:13 is the first one. So, and again, what you got to see is where have you been, and how you have been out of that now. When you accept Christ, you're out of that. By faith alone in Christ alone, boom, you're out of that marketplace. It says Christ redeemed us from what? From the curse of the law. So when you're in that market, when you were slave to sin, you were a curse. You were under that curse, having become a curse for us. For it's written, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." 4:5, Galatians chapter 4, verse 5. It says, in order that He might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons. So not only were you bought out of the market, you were bought out of market. You were what? What else happened? You were what? What did you say? I like the other word. Not bought in, but what? Placed in. That's good. Placed into a family. So you were on the marketplace, you were by yourself, a slave to sin, alone in the world, and now you got a big family. I don't know. I don't have all the words listed. I can't just look at it and tell, but I can look it up later. Ephesians 5:16. I think he said one. Ephesians 5:16. Whoops. That can't be it. Let's skip that one. I don't know. What did you say, Mark? No. Yeah, well, and 5:16 is wrong. They're one of those. Could have the right verse, wrong book. All right, it's a good one. Let's go to Colossians 4:5. Colossians 4:5. I'm just curious. Who's got an? Why do you do NIV? Somebody read Colossians 4:5 out of the NIV. Nice and loud. Okay, not everybody at once. You have redeeming the time?
Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every good opportunity.
What do you have, Kevin?
Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity.
Okay. Here, I'm going to read it to you the way it should. It says, walk, this is the way it should be. Walk yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, redeeming the time. Redeeming the time. Okay, so the idea here is that we're redeeming the time because we've been bought out of the marketplace, and the idea here is this one. Let's do it this way. This one's focus is on the price paid. Where Lutro, we're the very first where we started. Let's. Another time. I'm not going to chase a rabbit tonight. I got like 60 things. Lutro denotes the actual deliverance. So this is focused on the price paid. This word, the root word that we originally started with, actually looks on the deliverance or the setting of liberty. Setting one free. Freedom. So if we've been paid with a price, Christ was the Redeemer that paid the price. We were slaves in the sin market. We were bought out of that marketplace. What are we now? Free. Free to do what? Can we put ourselves back in the marketplace? Well, we could. We can keep on sinning. But we're really not in the marketplace because why? Because I would assume that somebody else can come and purchase us. We can't. Who could pay the price for us? And remember, the reason I'm going to say this now, you'll see why in a few years from now you'll be hit with this one day. This never says who's charging the price. It's about where we are, what Christ has done for us. Because someone will say, well, he had to pay the price because Satan held the price on our heads. No. That's false understanding. Our price is on our head because of where we put ourselves. Who has to pay the penalty for our sin? No, but what I'm saying is there are people that have said Christ had to do this to pay the price so Satan couldn't ever. Pardon me? Really? Okay. Okay. What did you say? I'm sorry. Well, that's what they had looked at. It's not. Remember, this idea of what a redeemer is, and it's not there's no point will Boaz give money to anybody. He's redeeming Ruth from the situation she's in that will make her better off. Nothing's benefiting him when he does it. Think about it. When Christ buys us out of the marketplace and does what he does for us, is anything benefiting the Redeemer? Does anything necessarily have to be transacted to anybody to give a certificate that says, like when you buy something, you go to the marketplace and you purchase a gallon of milk. You're buying it out of the marketplace. You're paid, but you get a receipt. You're right now making the transaction between you and the company so that you can have the milk. So that's how people look at it. When you're bought at a marketplace, somebody's got to get the transaction. Somebody's got to get that price paid to say it's paid in full. It's not that kind of deal, people. Satan doesn't hold anything over God. Believe me. That's a total bogus misunderstanding. That's also a very false doctrine. Satan is who he is, a fallen angel, very powerful, but that's it. Christ did this and paid the price because what God's justice and love needed to be vindicated. And it doesn't mean at any point we have to accept it. We can say no and stay unsaved. It doesn't stop the effect of this. He's still the Redeemer. Notice that the price has been paid in full. There's been a price. Didn't have anything to do with... It's all one-sided. Think about this. And when Boaz does what he does for Ruth, it's all one-sided. It's for Ruth. I was looking at this the other night and reading through it, and I go, what's in it for him? Because most guys say, what's in it for me? And I say, well, he gets a good-looking girl. I don't think Boaz would have a problem getting a good-looking girl. Okay? And it's not nothing to do with Rich. He was a man's man. He wouldn't have a problem. He knew how to behave. He knew how to be a man, knew how to attract a woman, how to behave with a woman, that kind of thing. So it's not a problem finding a woman. But there is a problem finding the right woman and doing what God wants in God's timing. And that's the whole idea behind this. Anyway, next part. We did a little bit on terminology. Now I got to find the next page of notes that I want to flip to, since I got notes everywhere. Okay. Ready? To section 2. What is the what did I say? Provision. Everybody got that? Doesn't matter. I turn the page. Get the tape. What is the Redeemer provision? And I'll explain as we go through this what that actually means. Now, what we did discuss a little bit as far as Redeemer, a little bit in the book of Ruth, then just to bring you up to speed, Ruth had married into the family. Naomi's husband, let's do it like this so everybody gets a picture of what's going on. Naomi and Elimelech, we're going to abbreviate, were originally married, and they decided with their 2 sons to trek off to Moab. His 2 sons were Chilion and Mahlon. It's like an open book test if somebody would come up with it. And as they spent time in Moab, Elimelech passed away and the boys got married. Let's see, this one married Ruth and this one married Orpah. Oh, okay. It wasn't Oprah, it was Orpah. And it wasn't Orca either, for those of you that thought she was large. And what happened is these guys passed away. Now the way the Redeemer works is she has to be redeemed, Naomi. It can come through these also. Part of the redemption was the land, and I'm trying to think of a nice word, an heir. They had to produce an heir, and at this point, Ruth nor Orpah have had any children. Their lineage has not been carried on, and we'll see at the end of the book of Ruth, when Ruth does have a child, it is considered Naomi's as well as hers. So, but in order to have that happen, you have to be redeemed. Who can redeem you? Well, we looked at the law of the Levirate marriage, and I don't feel the Levirate really plays into this, because the Levirate was a scary idea to us, because we live very, the more I think about this and study Ruth, the more I think we've come a long way, baby. My kids and I sat down and talked about husband, wives, how to pick a husband, and all this, but this is way before this. This is when Daddy knew better and knew you really well as a child, spent time with you and said, this is going to be the perfect husband for you. Well, I don't love him. Love schmuck. It has nothing to do with it. What it has to do is the right husband-wife relationship and understanding how that works and to come under that and get married. And what happens is they end up growing in that relationship. So we're far removed from that. So we're looking at this, oh, this is so romantic. And when you really read Ruth, you know, there's nobody opening up car doors. You know, nobody making sure your seat's pushed under gently. Nothing wrong with being cavalier. But this is a man's man doing what he has to do. And doing it very honorably. And he's not first in line. And we'll see that next week. He's not first in line. There's a closer Redeemer. Now, we don't know, and I've heard a few people's understanding, where does Boaz play in? Who is he? We know one thing. He's a relative of Elimelech's. So he can play the part of Redeemer. He's not the closest relative, but he's a relative. Now, he could be a brother. He could be a brother. You know, and we're thinking brothers, okay, Elimelech was maybe 60, his brother's 56, and Ruth is 25, this is an old man. People, we got to come back to reality. These people kept having children. They could be 50 years between these guys for all we know. I'm not saying it's his brother, but what it is, whoever it is, there's someone in between who has first stubs to redeem. And the idea of the Redeemer is first of all, to be a Redeemer, he has to have someone in the marketplace, someone that's a slave, someone that a purchase price has to be paid out by it. Okay? And the Redeemer has to make that price and do these, and I'm going to give you basically a couple prerequisites here that it involves. First of all, let's just do this. Put letter A. The kinsman redeemer, KR, was responsible for protecting the interests of needy members of the extended family. Now, how far does it go? Not very far. So don't say, oh, well, I remember my uncle 5 years placed me back 6 yards. No. The farthest, and I've done enough research to make my mind go, the farthest I can see is maybe second cousins. Like the Good South. And the more I think about it, the better it is sometimes. These responsibilities are, number one, there's basically 5 responsibilities. One was to provide. Bless you. And in this case, provide an heir. Look with me at Deuteronomy chapter 25, 5 through 10. Deuteronomy. And even though he's not a total Levirate, they overlap, just to let you know. Deuteronomy 25, 5. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, and I want you to notice that, it says a son. If he had 12 girls, he still had to have a son. And the reason I say that is because he had to carry on the family line. The land, the property, the name, everything was passed down to the son. Just so you'll know where I'm going with that. Has no son. The wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go in to her and take her to himself as a wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And this is very loose. The reason I say that, he didn't necessarily have to marry her. And I'm very loose terms because we're in different day and age. So don't say, well, this applies to today. In other words, as long as they could produce an heir and a son, he could say, okay, I'm done with that. Now you can be freed to go marry somebody else. It's married, but it's very loose. Understand what I'm saying? She becomes a wife because of why? Because they're consummating a marriage relationship. But in that loosely tied organization, she didn't have to stay married to him forever. Judah, for instance, had children through Tamar, even though he was cajoled into doing what he was supposed to do in Genesis 38, but that's the only time he ever did anything with this woman. That was his wife to conceive carried on the heir, and through Tamar came Pharez and Hezron, and through them came Boaz, and through Boaz comes Obed. And let's go on down the line. So what I'm saying is, we're dealing with Ruth, a distant relative of Boaz's, had the same problem, but he only had a relationship with the woman once to produce the heir. He wasn't married to her other than that time period, is what I'm saying. Same thing goes on. They got to produce an heir. You got to understand, the land was very protected. This is God's land, and God said, I want to keep it in the family. And what happened is, you married outside the family. That's why when you see all the prohibitions, don't marry these people, don't marry these people, keep it. Why? Because as the families got watered down, the land started disappearing. You know why Israel has so much problem with the land today? Tell me who's in the family. I'm not trying to be loosely, but nobody could tell who's in the family there. Because there's no, the lineage gets so watered down. And I mean, you marry outside Judaism today to get upset, but you don't know who you're really marrying. So, verse 6, and it shall be the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother. So the first child born belongs to the brother. See, hey, we think very American. I can even hear some of you in your minds going, ooh, ooh. I mean, ooh. Lizzie and I were talking about that, and I said, think about this. You actually, when a father arranged these marriages, here am I, just think. I got 3 daughters. Okay, and I got arranged marriages. And I'm going to marry one of my daughters into a family. I got to make sure all the brothers are okay in this time period. Not just, she may be marrying Joe Slimy. And Slimy may be a good guy, but his brothers are real, ugh. But Slimy may die 5 years after marrying one of my kids. Guess who gets her? The next one's down the line. And you got to really worry what family you marry your kids into at this day and age. You had to have close-knit relationships. You had to know the people. Otherwise, you're just dumping your kid and saying, whoa, look how lucky they got. So you think about the family involvements at that time. It wasn't saying, well, I don't really approve of your husband that much, but it's your life. It wasn't even like that. Think about that. And as a daughter getting married, or son, and you get this girl and say, can you imagine a brother? You're marrying her? No, really, don't marry her. I was telling Lizzie, think about this. That's the ugliest woman I ever married. Don't die, bro. I'll give you my heart. I'll give you my kidney. Don't die. I mean, there's a lot of, I know, we're so removed from the thinking of it, but we're very, fortunate, I guess, in this society that we don't have this idea. But what it was mainly God gave them protection to protect what? What was the main thing that had to be protected? It was the Abrahamic covenant. To keep everything in the family, don't water it down. Could you imagine a messianic line by the time it got to Jesus from this point in Deuteronomy? How watered down, we wouldn't have known who Jesus' family was. Okay? Yet the genealogy shows it was kept in the family. And even with the book of Ruth, say, well, Ruth is a Moabite, but the way she fell in, the way she's redeemed, her child was still Mahlon's child, and it became Naomi's, who put it right back in the family of Elimelech. It's just, anyway. Verse 7, but if a man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the elders, gave the elders, and just, we're going to hold off on this part of the verse because we're going to get into face slapping and spitting and all that stuff later. But just hold yourself there because I want to apply this somewhere else. But first of all, he had to provide an heir. Second of all, because I want to get through at least part A of this. I'd like to get through part C, or else I'm not going to get the continuity. Second of all, he was to protect. He was to protect the land. And, obviously, family, so that nobody would be sold outside. Look at Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus 25, verse 25. If a fellow countryman of yours becomes so poor he has to sell part of his property, then his nearest kinsman is to come and buy back what his relative has sold. Or in case of a man who has no kinsman, but so recovers them, his means as to find sufficient for its redemption. Then he shall calculate the years since its sale, and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and so return his property. But if he has not found sufficient means to get back to it for himself, then what he has sold shall remain in the hands of its purchaser until the year of Jubilee. But at the year of Jubilee it shall revert, that he may return to his property. So see how God's protected us? And you know why later, we're going to jump way ahead, why later Israel was sent into exile? Because they Why? Well, I really did a real hard search. I looked high and I looked low for the owner, but I couldn't find him. So I guess it's mine. And God says, you haven't honored 400 and some years of jubilees. Boom, that's how long you're going into exile for. So they paid 70 years for all the missed jubilees for that. That's kind of interesting. But that's the discussion for another time. Point three, they were to give liberty. To give liberty. They were to redeem a relative who had been sold into slavery, thereby giving him his freedom. And just for sake of time, Leviticus 25, 47 through 49. Fourthly, for justice. To serve justice. In Numbers 35, it talks about a blood avenger. Numbers 35, 9 through 21 talks about a blood avenger. And that blood avenger means the goel of blood. In other words, somebody in the family gets murdered. He enacts the capital punishment rule. If somebody in the family gets robbed, he makes sure that is taken care of. 6'10" and 6'1" wide and big man. Purchase your redeemers correctly. Fifthly, he also looks to the future. Numbers chapter 5, Numbers 5:8. But if a man has no relative to whom restitution may be made for the wrong, the restitution which is made for the wrong must go to the Lord for the priest, besides the ram of atonement by which atonement is made for him. So this is future. In other words, put on account. Now this whole picture of Redeemer, actually B, there are prerequisites. Actually, let's do this. B. There are prerequisites. In other words, I have relatives. I can't just go be somebody's relative. Kinsman redeemer. We all have relatives. Think about it. There are certain requirements that make me the kinsman redeemer. So, since we're talking about Boaz, what makes him a kinsman redeemer? What gives him the ability to say he's... Well, first of all, number one, must be a kinsman. Must be a kinsman. In this case, he was related to Elimelech. But what I want to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to put... I don't want to do this. Elimelech. There's a relationship. We don't know what it was, but I want to show you the New Testament look at it. In other words, I'm going to give you the Old Testament. We're talking about Ruth. I'm going to say this is what Boaz was to the idea, how he fit the prerequisites. Let's go to the New Testament to see something. Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Now, Jesus is what? Isn't Jesus fully God? Is Christ God? Yes or no? Come on, this is easy, simple stuff. Yes. He couldn't be a kinsman. He's not related to me if he's God. I'm not God. Are you God? Anybody here God? But Hebrews 2:14 says this. Since then children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook in the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and might deliver those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. Galatians 4:4 says this. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, under the law. So Christ did something very different from anybody else could do. He took on humanity. And was he 100% humanity? Yes. Therefore, according to Galatians 4:4 and many other passages, anything that has to do with the incarnation was important because he made us kinfolk. See, as God, he could pay the price. Duh. But he couldn't be my kinsman. Okay, second of all, he had to be a kinsman. Second of all, he had to be able to set me free. Or to slave this, since I'm applying to Christ, set Ruth free, and Naomi too. Did he have the ability? Did Boaz have the ability? Well, we saw in chapter 2, verse 1, he was the Ishgabor Hayel. That means he was a man of honor and valor, or wealthy man, or however you want to put it. He was well endowed. He had the abilities. He had the abilities. Look at Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. And the greatest enemy is time. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 11. And every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But he, referring to Christ, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from the time onward until his enemies be made his footstool for his feet. For by one offering he has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. Look at John chapter 10. John chapter 10. I love this verse. It's so cool when you look at this. John chapter, when you see the Passion of Christ, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. I haven't seen the movie. But remember these verses. Because no matter what happens, these are important. It says in verse 10, chapter 10, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Verse 18. Same chapter. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay down on my own initiative. I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. That means no point did anybody take it. He was able, and the third one, he was also willing. There's a willingness, or willingness, let's do it this way, willingness to redeem. And we'll see as we look at the book of Ruth that when Ruth made the initiative to go before Boaz and say, marry me, he said, I'd love to, let's do it, but not now because there's someone closer. Let me go to him like a proper Ishgabor Hayel should do. Go before that man and say, do you want to, you are able, do you want to redeem Ruth? And he will say, no. And very interesting thing happens at that point. And we'll discuss Deuteronomy 25 in association with that. But the willingness to redeem, he didn't have. Boaz was more than willing to redeem Ruth, but he had to do it properly. So he was willing to do that. And we'll see that in chapter 4. So if you want to write down Ruth 4 here. And we need to go to Hebrews chapter 10 again. Obviously you can see where this plays the great picture in redemption, verse 7. Actually, Yeah, let's read 10:7, but I want to go to Matthew 16 also. 10:7 says, Then I said, Behold, I have come. In the roll of the book it is written about me to do thy will, O God. So he was willing. But what happens, I should have read this first. Matthew 16 gives the account of where that actually takes place. Matthew 16:23. Well, part of it. What this conversation with Peter, he says, at the end of it, he says, Then turned and looked at Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan. You are, and the only reason he called Peter Satan is because Satan was using Peter's favorite body function for his own use, his mouth. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's interests. So what was Jesus there to do? Not my will, but thy will. He was willing to be the Redeemer. So there's a willingness. Fourthly, and we'll finish with this, and then we'll pick up next week with the rest of this idea of the provision and the last 2 points on redemption. But the fourth thing, the Redeemer must not need redemption. Redeemer must not need redemption. So when I say that, what things come to your mind? What Redeemer must not be? A slave. He must not be a slave. Can't redeem another slave. What else can't he be? Can't be in debt. So he's got to be free from debt. Can't be outside the family. He has to be. I love, there's a Hebrew word called mishpucha. That means you're in the family. So it has to be family. Look at Hebrews 4:15. Two sets of verses and we'll finish. Hebrews 4:15. Hebrews 4:15. Actually, 3 sets of verses. We'll see. Let's do 2 first. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but one who has been tempted in all things as we, and yet without sin. So in this case, he's not in the sin market, as Romans 7:14 says. He's out of that. He's without sin. But he's human. And has he been tempted? Absolutely. 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter 2:22. Actually, let's start in verse 21. 1 Peter 2:21. Says, For you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth, and while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously, and he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. But by his wounds you were healed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd, the guardian of your souls. Turn back a page to 1 Peter 1:18. Knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like gold, silver or gold, from your futile way of life, inherited from your forefathers, but, emphasize that, but with precious blood as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless of Christ. So he was not in any need of redemption. When Christ went to the cross, what's the greatest words I find in the Bible? Some of the greatest words from Pilate says, I find no fault in him. Is that not the greatest truth ever uttered by an ignoramus? I find no fault. Now, if he could say it, do we not have somebody that can redeem us because he is totally free? And in Boaz's case, he was the Ishgabor Aiel. In the time of absolute chaos in the book of Judges, he stands out. Everybody's doing right in their own eyes, and he's following what God wants. He is in no need of redemption. He can very well do it. And we'll see the classiness of this guy, because he says, man, Ruth, I'd really love to do it.